Efendim bir sonraki oturumumuz şimdi başlayacak. Moderatörümüz Waseem'i sahneye davet ediyorum.
Hello. Hi, Chiara.
Hi, Chiara.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear
you.
you. Am I audible? To you?
Yes. Very. Thank you.
All right.
All right.
I think we are set. Yeah. Are you ready?
Yes, I need to share my screen with you.
All right.
All right.
Okay. So thank you very much for listening patiently. Çok teşekkür ederiz. Now we have, in this next section, we have with us Dr. Chiara Quaranta from University of Edinburgh. Dr. Chiara Quaranta teaches film studies at the University of Edinburgh. She is an editorial board member of the prestigious Film Philosophy Journal. She has recently authored a book titled Iconoclasm in European Cinema, The Ethics and Aesthetics of Image Destruction. It's a 2023 Edinburgh University Press book. Her research focused on the relationship between philosophy and cinema with specific attention to the film aesthetics. She is currently working on the disruptive approach to film sound and on the ways in which gender issues are articulated in the soundtrack. Today, she's going to speak about Twilight of the Icons, Cinema with a Hammer, which is her homage to Friedrich Nietzsche's The Twilight of the Idols. Please welcome Dr. Chiara. Dr. Chiara, welcome to the 7th International Cinema and Philosophy Symposium in Ankara.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this great presentation. Can you hear me well?
Yeah. It's very well.
Very well.
You can begin. All right.
First of all, I feel very honored to be invited to this symposium. I participated a couple of years ago as a presenter, and I thought it was a wonderful occasion to share ideas on cinema and philosophy. So it's a great opportunity for me to be back, and a lovely honor to have been invited. So I thank the editorial team for inviting me, and all of the people attending, because I know you've had a long day of presentations and conversations, so I greatly appreciate your presence at this talk today. So my paper today focuses as part of my ongoing research on iconoclasm and destructive gestures in the cinema. And specifically today, I would like to explore with you something that I'm still researching on, which is the radical black screen, the radical use of the black screen in cinema. And by iconoclasm in a film ambit, I mean the destruction, the deliberate destruction of film images, which can be either literal or metaphorical. And this is something that I will explain shortly. But first of all, I would like to address the title of my talk, which explicitly evokes Nietzsche, but also to a certain extent is also an homage to Deleuze. So first of all, it is explicitly homaging Nietzsche's uncompromising critical project against Western philosophy itself, as it is expressed in all his works, but specifically in this one, The Twilight of the Idols, or How to Philosophize with the Hammer. And specifically the second half of the title, which I've rephrased as Cinema with a Hammer, I think well renders the idea of a cinema that has a fundamental critical function and position. So very much like Nietzsche's own project, critical project against philosophy, everything about Western philosophy, I am interested in a cinema that is critical not so much of this or that film or a specific cinematic tradition, but a cinema really that criticizes the conception, the concept of cinema itself. And so in this way, the cinema at the center of my talk, a cinema that takes an iconoclastic approach to representation, creates films with a hammer by destroying our more habitual understanding and approaches to cinema, as hopefully I will be able to explore in the rest of the talk. And then the first part, I've reworked The Twilight of the Idols with The Twilight of the Icons, because to render homage to the decline of the old truth of cinema, so the idea, for instance, that cinema is a medium able to reproduce reality, this illusion of the film image, but also to point to the ways in which an iconoclastic aesthetics uproots our more traditional understandings of cinema. However, the expression twilight of the icons, I'm not the first one using it. We find it in different works, but specifically Gilles Deleuze homages Nietzsche in Difference and Repetition. And it does so in a specific point where he is considering Platonism and the concept of images. And specifically in this discussion, Deleuze is rejecting a Platonic philosophy of the same in favor of a more Nietzschean philosophy of difference. And in doing so, Deleuze is considering two types of images, both understood as copies, the icon and the idol. And the icon historically has been understood as a trustworthy representation, as an image in a relationship of internal likeness with the model. Whereas the idol has been more often understood as the false double, a copy of a copy, very much distant from the truth of the model, or in the words of Deleuze, Deleuze claims that idols are images that have externalized likeness. So while historically the icon has been privileged over the idol, Deleuze is actually put an argument in favor of the difference at the very core of the idol. So he is privileging the idol over the icon, because through the idol we can overcome potentially the hierarchical binary between copy and model. And that is why Deleuze uses the expression twilight of the icons to praise the rays of the idols. I use the same expression, twilight of the icons, but for a different reason, because I put forward an argument in favor of what I call iconoclastic icon, which are images in a crepuscular zone, if we want, and I will provide a more in-depth discussion of this image in a while. And my argument really develops from the most important, the most critical manifestation of image destruction in history and the theological debates that accompany it. And I'm referring to the Byzantine controversy over the representation of God in a material frame during the 8th and 9th centuries. And here I've just reproduce an example of a rare example of iconophilic art at the time of iconoclasm, and at the bottom of the slide, at the bottom of this page, you can see a scene of iconoclasm. So the icon of Christ, the image reproducing visually the face of Christ, is about to be immersed in this liquid and therefore destroyed. And in fact, during the Byzantine controversy, images, sacred images were physically destroyed. And the reasons behind the Byzantine controversy were not just religious, but also economic and political. However, for the sake of my later discussion on cinema and iconoclasm, I will focus exclusively on the religious debate and the two opposing views of iconophiles and iconoclasts. So during the controversy, the two Greek terms for images, icon and eidolon, became the icon and the idol, referring to two distinct interpretations of images. So I think it's easier to understand with an example, because when we talk about idols and icons, we're not talking about two different images, but we're talking about two different interpretations of the same image. And this, I think, really brings out the ambiguity and the potential of images. So, for instance, the same image is understood in two opposing ways. And again, I am very much simplifying the debate for the sake of my later discussion on cinema. So the theological debate around it was far more complex than what I am discussing now. But according to the iconophilic interpretation, this image is an icon or icon of Christ, which is to say that it is an image in a relationship of internal likeness with the intelligible model, and in so doing, it configures itself as an intermediary between the terrestrial world of people and the celestial sphere of God. So ideally, by looking at the visual representation of Christ, the believer should then be brought to the contemplation without images of God. So there is always the point of arrival of the icon is not the icon itself, it's not just the mere contemplation of the icon, but the mental, intellectual contemplation of God. In the iconoclastic interpretation, instead, this same image is understood as an eidolon or idol of Christ, a false image, if not a false God itself, because it is an image with no relationship with the intelligible model, no relationship with God. It is an image that has externalized likeness, so there is no longer internal likeness, but only a visual replica of the God, and it is an image grounded exclusively in the visible realm, with no connection to the celestial sphere. So by looking at this image according to the iconoclasts, we are not brought to the mental contemplation of God, but we remain in the terrestrial world, and therefore it is a false image and a false God. Now, this crucial ambiguity of images that allow them to be at once trustworthy representation and false images has historically underpinned sensorial practices. So, in order to affirm one worldview against another, the other artifacts are physically destroyed or, more subtly, are visually concealed. And to name a few examples, we could think about the act that initiated the Byzantine controversy, so the destruction of an icon of Christ at the command of Emperor Leo III. Or in this slide, for instance, in the left side of the slide, I've included images of iconoclastic acts in history. So at the top, we have an example of the result of 16th century Dutch iconoclasm. And you can see that the faces of the statues of Holy Mary and the saints have been physically destroyed. And this is from a church. And then two more recent examples that I would still categorize as iconoclastic acts aimed at destroying the other perspective. The one in the middle is the Taliban's blowing up of the Buddhas of Bamiyan in 2001. And at the bottom, we have the ISIS blowing up of the Temple of Bel in the ancient city of Palmyra. So in all these examples, we have the destruction of artifacts that is aimed also at destroying the worldview they represent and the past that they embody. So there is clearly an exclusionary, violent intent. But the same ambiguity of images that also testify to their ethical, political, and emotional charge, because otherwise we wouldn't attack images if we weren't thinking that there's such a charge. The same ambiguity also allows for more critical, aesthetic, ethical, and political approaches to images of art. And this is what I placed in the other side of the slide. So I think there is a fundamental difference between destructive gestures against artifacts and destructive gestures within an artwork. Because in the first case, we have a violent sensorial attack against a different perspective, as in the example from the left side of the slide, with an explicit exclusionary intent. Whereas in the other case, we have an attempt at creating art, making art, through destruction within an artistic ambit. And this destruction can be literal or metaphorical and can become part of actually inclusive practices. And hopefully this is something that is clear in the right side of the slide. We have examples from modern art, of iconoclastic art. So literal iconoclasm, if you want, in the cut canvas of Lucio Fontana, or a more metaphorical destruction of figuration and mimesis in Yves Klein blue monochromatic painting at the bottom. So in all these cases, iconoclasm within an artwork forecloses mimesis. And in so doing, it calls for our attention, for the viewer's attention and critical attention to take responsibility for the representation, opening up a variety of senses and perspectives within images, because rather than a fixed image and a unified meaning, we are left with the opacity of the image, which opens it up to multiple meanings and understandings. Now, my main contention is that in a cinema ambit, iconoclastic gestures constitute both a way to criticize the film image illusion, for instance, the illusion that film images can give us a picture of the world, but iconoclastic gestures can also reveal new modes and new ways to engage with the world, both cinematic world and phenomenal world. And so when we deal with iconoclasm in cinema, I think about a cinema that is destructive of transparent cinema, of the clarity of the mimetic image, and in general, a cinema that is critical of the idea of cinema as a window onto the world, as a medium that reproduces reality, reproduces experience. What remains after or during the process of distraction in cinema is what I call iconoclastic icon, by which I mean an image that maintains an internal likeness with the model while breaking any external visual similarity with it. This type of image is iconoclastic because we have an iconoclastic understanding of the image-model relationship. So the image is conceived as in some ways insufficient for the representation of the model. But this same image, this iconoclastic icon, is a icon following philosophical tradition because it maintains an internal similarity with the unrepresented or unrepresentable model, pointing towards it through the non-representational aesthetics. And I've decided to maintain the Greek term for image, icon, rather than the Latin and then English icon, because the term icon is very much associated with the religious controversy, whereas I wanted to keep a pagan, free term to consider a variety of images and not just associated with Christian images, the Christian iconoclasm. So here in this slide, you can see a limited range of example of iconoclastic iconists in cinema, because of course these are still images, so we're missing the iconoclastic gestures that we have with alter motion or in the disjunction between soundtrack and image track. But hopefully, even from these stills, it can become already clear what I mean by destructive gestures in cinema. So we can have literal iconoclasm, the literal destruction of the physical support of film. And this is something that you can see in the three stills in black and white, because in all these cases, the film strip has been physically attacked and manipulated by scratch over or overexposure to lights, immersed underwater. In Carmelo Bene's still, you can see the bubbles in the places where the film celluloid has been burnt physically. And then we can have a more metaphorical iconoclasm in which the destructive gesture attacks the clarity of the image and mimesis and figuration. And this is something that we can appreciate, for instance, in Bergman's Cries and Whispers, where we have the destruction of figuration through the fade to red, or in Derek Jarman's radical approach to representation in blue, which consists of a blue monochromatic film. So here the film strip itself has not been attacked, but metaphorically we do have iconoclastic films. Now, today I've discussed most of these films in my book, so today I want to look at what I find is the most radical iconoclastic icon in cinema, which is the black screen, and this is something that I'm currently researching on. However, I'm not going to start with the film example, but I would like to start with an example from painting that I think really encapsulates the potential of the monochromatic black image in modern and contemporary art, and the iconoclastic thrust of such an image. And I'm thinking specifically at Kazimir Malevich's Black Square on White Background from 1915. Malevich was a Russian painter working in the early 20th century and a fundamental figure for abstract art. This painting is the seminal work of Suprematism, which is the avant-garde founded by Malevich in 1913, and it is a proper iconoclastic icon. Deliberately so, even in the project of Malevich himself, because at the first time it was exhibited at the 010 exhibition, Malevich placed this painting high up on the wall in the corner across the room, as you can see hopefully from this slide, which was the spot where Orthodox icons of saints would traditionally sit. So that's why we can define this painting as a deliberate iconoclastic icon. And this is something that scholars working on iconoclasm and art have picked up on. And I have two specific examples that help me then develop my own argument on the black image in cinema. So the first one is Alain Besançon in his work on iconoclasm in philosophy, history, and art. He concludes his book by looking at this painting and clearly discusses it in terms of an iconoclastic icon, so an image that embodies both an iconoclastic approach to representation, but also maintains this connection between the internal connection between the image and the model. And I know it's a long, direct quote, but I think it's very important, so I'm going to read it all. So I'm quoting directly from Besançon, who writes, "There is an evolution of the world and of art, which step by step, destruction after destruction, arrives at an end point, which is God. This God transcends all representation and can be approached only by the negative path of objectlessness, the non-figurative. This God beyond God is intuited as a perfect void, as nothingness, as being non-being, and all figuration of objects and of the absolute itself appears in that dark light as an idol. That is why Malevich took care to hang his black square high in a corner of the exhibition hall, which for every Russian meant he had placed it in the red corner, the place reserved for holy icons." End of quote. And similarly to Besançon, also Gerard Weissman, in his work on modern art and notions of absence and luck, discusses at length this painting and defines it as a veritable icon, and includes it in modern art's dimension of making one see. And this is so because in modern art, and specifically with Malevich's Black Square, paintings and art no longer represent something for the viewer, but pushes the viewer to see something that is not directly accessible on the canvas. And it is through these aesthetics of objectlessness that the viewer is directly interpellated by the work of art. And in fact, Weissman claims that this sort of aesthetics, quote, is a way to give the viewer a place by calling on their imagination to apply the final touch to the painting, end of quote. So we are in a dimension of questioning, of art questioning the viewer directly, of art embodying a sort of visual enigma for the viewer. And this is something that we find also in cinema's black screens. So we could say that Malevich is making paintings with a hammer, to evoke Nietzsche again, advancing a critical stance about Western painting, a tradition in Western painting. So painting conceived as the art of imitating nature, of reproducing something of the phenomenal world. Malevich's Black Square is explicitly an objectless painting, and in much the same way I identify a cinema made with a hammer that employs the black screen as a question image, as an image that poses question to the viewer in its objectlessness. So I am referring specifically to films in which the black screen ceases to have a narrative or a recognizable stylistic function and becomes instead an image in its own right that poses questions to the viewers. And so, like in Malevich's painting, also in cinema's black screens, we have a tension between our desire to see, and specifically to see something recognizable on the screen, and the darkness, the opacity, the absence at the core of the black screen. Now, the history of cinema is filled with black screen, and of course not every black screen responds to an iconoclastic intent. Most often black screens in cinema have a narrative function. And I think it's easier to understand what I mean through film examples. So for instance, a black screen could reproduce mimetically the experience of one of the characters in the diegesis, and in Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill Volume 2, this occurs at a certain point in the film. We're faced with a black screen. However, this black screen has no disruptive or iconoclastic intent, but it is a point of view shot. So at this point in the film, the protagonist has been buried alive, and we share our experience of complete darkness under the soil. So you can see here, the black screen mimetically renders the protagonist's experience of reality. So we see what she sees, literally. And then the other primary function of the black screen in cinema is that of signaling a passage of time, accompanying a fade in or a fade out. And again, you can see it. We have so many examples of fade out and fade in, signaling a passage of time. And this is something present in cinema since cinema became a narrative medium, since there was a narrative and some editing, of course, in film. So here, the black screen, even though it does not mimetically render our experience of time passing, still remains within a recognizably stylistic function, because we see the image slowly fade into black, then the screen becomes black, and then the image reemerges from black. And we know that some time has passed, and maybe also a change of place has occurred. So it's another frequent use of the black screen that does not acquire or respond to an iconoclastic intent. And then we have the actual black screen as iconoclastic icon that responds explicitly to a destructive and disruptive relationship between image and model. So like in Malevich's black square on white background, the black screen as iconoclastic icon maintains an internal likeness with the represented or a representable model, while rejecting any possible visual rendering of this model. Rather than defining the black screen as a non-image or an anti-image, which often occurs, I understand the black screen as an objectless image, very much like in Malevich's painting. So this image is an image that poses questions to us viewer in its total withdrawal of figuration, and in so doing it opens up visual hiatuses in the film, and these visual hiatuses are also gaps in the meaning of the film that need to be filled by the viewer, by an active, thoughtful engagement with the film. So there is a process of creating images by emptying the image of its objects, or in the words of Tania Scilina Conte, who has discussed at length the black screen in a new book, Black Screens, White Frames. In the black screen we have, quote, voiding as a productive, not negative mode, end of quote. However, as much as I like this parallel between the black screen and Malevich's black square, there is a fundamental difference between these two images, because black square on white background, as its title suggests, is based on a relationship between two planes, the above and the below. So the plane of below of the white background and the above of the black square. Whereas when we look at cinema's black screens, there is no such above-below relationship at work here. We could, however, consider the relationship between what precedes and what follows a black screen, and definitely contributes to its meaning. So it's not so much a spatial but a temporal relationship at stake in cinema's black screens. Or if we just want to focus on the moment of the black screen, of the complete opacity and darkness of the image, we may want to consider the relationship between on-screen and off-screen. So between this blackness, this absence of objects that we see on screen, and the off-screen sounds that envelops this screen. And in a way, we have darkness of the image and the uncertainty of sounds, because in the black screen, it is impossible to see, to know the sources of the sounds we hear. So there is also ambiguity of sound throughout. And it is specifically in this disjunctive relationship between image track and soundtrack that I think iconoclastic cinema can really develop a more critical approach in general. And the black screen in this sense is the most radical gesture, because it renders synchronization impossible. We have complete darkness and complete rejection of any object and on any figuration. And this is why the black screen, like Malevich's black square, is a question image, to the point that film scholar Nicole Brené has called the black screen in cinema as the ultimate question image. And she identifies 4 functions of the black screen in cinema, and I'm reading directly from her. She writes, firstly, a black image is an image that one does not want to make. Secondly, a black image is an image that one must not accept. Thirdly, a black image takes the place of a just image. And fourthly, a black image indicates what is outside the film. End of quote. So if we look at the history of cinema, we can identify a tradition in negative aesthetics that has exploited the black screen as question image. And this is something that we see both in experimental avant-garde cinema and sometimes, more rarely of course, in narrative films. So perhaps the most radical and most famous iconoclastic approach to cinema by means of a black screen is Guy Debord's Hurlement en faveur de Sade, All's for Sade, from 1952. This film is structured on the alternation between white screens and black screens. When the screen is white, there is speech. When the screen is black, there is silence. And the film ends with 24 minutes of silent black screen. So there's also an argument to be made about the black screen and the cinematic mode of boredom, for instance, which, however, I'm not going to make today. So this film, because of the lack of any figuration, because of the objectlessness of its images, has been defined by scholars as a sound film without images. However, my argument is that we do have images. It's not just a sound film. There is always something for us to see on screen. Either we see a white monochromatic image or a black monochromatic image. And in a way, here we have a completely radical approach to cinema conceived as entertainment, as pleasure, as storytelling. And Guy Debord is doing to cinema with this film what Malevich had done to painting with Black Square, because Debord is destroying cinema as it had been conceived until then by reducing it to a white screen and a black screen. Now, we could just look at the black screen in avant-garde cinema, where this device abounds, but I actually want to turn to narrative films, which at a certain points include iconoclastic moments by means of a black screen. And here are just 3 of my favorite examples: Godard's Alphaville, Kieślowski's Three Colors Blue, and Haneke's The Castle. So at first glance, these films may seem less challenging than avant-garde films, because they do have a narrative and they also have figurative images, as you can see. And in fact, we have figuration being broken up by the black screen suddenly. However, I feel that these films are even more challenging than avant-garde films, because when we watch avant-garde films, we do expect an experimental or abstract aesthetics, whereas in narrative films, and in these three narrative films, for instance, we are suddenly faced by the absence, the lack, and the opacity of the black screen that interrupts the flow of images. And so in a way, here we have the black screen as question image in a manner that is even more demanding of us rather than experimental films. And in all these examples, we can also understand the black screen as the between the images, so the visualization of what would normally be between the figurative images, be hidden by the figurative images, and in a way this is a device to undermine the completeness of the representation, to affirm that there is some
Hi, Chiara. Hello, excuse me, sorry for interrupting. We have got just 15 minutes and we have to take some questions or comments also from, could you just...
Recording in progress.
A brief.
Okay, so how long do I have more?
In total, we have 15 minutes.
15.
Which includes question session. Okay, could you just make it 10, 5 minutes?
Sorry, I got 45 minutes, but I will try to wrap up quickly.
All right. You can continue. Yeah.
So I will just play this on the background. This is a scene from Alphaville when the protagonist is questioned by the male character about the nature of love, and she's unable to provide either orally or visually a complete definition of love. And so we have an incompleteness in the representation, both orally and visually, as you can see here, that Anna Karina's face intermittently plunges into and emerges from the black screen. So this scene conveys the fragmentary nature of love and a consequence, the fragmentary nature of any discourse on love through the incompleteness of visual and oral elements. So Godard does not entirely negate a representation of love, but by undermining the clarity of this representation, in a way conveys the fragmentary nature of love and the incapacity of rendering love fully accessible to us, to give us the intimacy between these two people accessible to us. As Gilles Deleuze wrote in discussing Godard's black screen, quote, that void, the void of the black screen, is the radical calling into question of the image, end of quote. So the black screen is an image calling into question the concept of image itself. And one way to engage with the black screen as this in-between space made visible is through Raymond Belleur's notion of between the images. So I will discuss it very briefly. Belleur discusses a variety of spaces of passage between images. Among these spaces, there is the space between movement and stasis. And one of these spaces of passage between movement and stasis is the space between shots, which is usually hidden by the movement of the film. Simply put, it is the editing cut that, sealing images together, conceals the process of editing through the flow of images. A space between images, the editing cut can also become an image in its own right, which is something that Deleuze had commented on. And in fact, he observed, if the cut grows larger, if it absorbs all the images, then it becomes the screen. When such a device is used in overall narrative films, it has the effect of opening up gaps in the films. These are visual gaps, but gaps of meaning as well. hinting at something that cannot be shown or something that resists figuration. So my final example is the most radical. We don't really have time to talk about it. It's João César Monteiro's Branca de Neve, Snow White from 2000, which is an iconoclastic adaptation of Robert Walser's anti-fairy tale Snow White. So here, the full film is predominantly made by a black image, and again, you can see it here. The screen is interrupted by a few mimetic moving images. The most recurring one is the moving image of a cloudy sky that gives us, again, the idea of movement, of color, of figuration. Otherwise, we just see blackness. And while in the previous example from Godard, the black screen constituted the between the images, so it was something suddenly breaking the mimetic moving image. In Monteiro's film, there is a reversal of this logic, because whereas figurative moving images become the space between. And this contrast between the black screen as the image of the film and the mimetic images as the in-between is further emphasized through a variety of oppositions in the film. We have the stasis of the black screen versus the movement of the figurative images, black versus color, voice speech that accompanies the black screen as opposed to the silence and noise that accompanies the figurative images, and then of course there is the complete disjunction between the image track and the soundtrack that recalls and elaborates on the binary between visually inaccessible and orally representable. So to wrap up, so in emptying the screen in this film of any figurative image related to the story, and it is a story centered on beauty, on this ideal of beauty, the black screen becomes the site for an interrogation of cinema and its images and a space of creative potential for spectatorial imagination, because this iconoclastic aesthetics forces spectators to inhabit the black screen, demanding an effort towards meaning and therefore encouraging imagination to fill the void. To wrap up, the black screen as image in its own right, as productive void that poses question, demonstrates the critical potential of iconoclasm in cinema, and whether we are looking at avant-garde films or narrative films, the black screen is a proper question image because it poses questions to us viewer by depriving us of mimesis and figuration of any object on the screen.
Is a proper question image because it poses questions to us figuration of any object on the screen.
Okay, sorry. So meaning is no longer to us explicitly on the screen, but we have to look for it, to search actively for it through our imagination. So it qualifies really as a screen of potency for us viewers. So if you think about Monteiro's film, Snow White, instead of having a univocal fixed image of the beauty at the core of the tale, the black screen allows for a plurality of perspectives to coexist and invites each viewer to imagine this non-visible beauty, each in their own unique way. And especially in narrative films, the iconic emptiness of the black screen ideally stimulates a more pensive engagement with the film world by disrupting our more habitual ways of dealing, of engaging with cinema. It is therefore my contention that an iconoclastic aesthetics, and specifically the radical use of the black screen, allows for a more critical approach to images and has the potential to expand our understanding of what cinema is and what cinema can do. In destroying a cinema of icons and idols, the iconoclastic icons of cinema made with the hammer open up still underexplored possibility for cinema as a medium of creative and imaginative potentialities. This is the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chiara. It was a really very insightful and rigorous presentation, and I'm sure it reminded lots of people around here the usage of. Could you hear me, Dr. Chiara? Yeah, I'm sure lots of people recall recall the films that they have seen where they have used, where they have seen the usage of black screen. And thank you very much for enlightening us about the potentialities of the black screen. So I would just have a little comment here regarding your presentation. This comment would be just a part of our ongoing discussion about the film and philosophy. So what we are trying to do, just to bring in the regarding your presentation of our. Can you hear me now?
Stop. I couldn't hear you for a while.
All right. I just have a comment. So here, this comment is part of our discussion here about film and philosophy. So what we do, we try to, normally what we assume at least, what films do to us, do to the philosophical concepts, they try to deconstruct them and try to present to the audience in a very simple way, some very complex philosophical ideas. And here, don't you think that when we try to use aesthetic strategies in films or use technicalities, don't you think that these technicalities can remystify or re-philosophize the already existing difficult ideas? Or don't you think a film's role, in order to reach a wider audience or wider viewership, they need to have simple strategies in order to make them more apprehensible? So I just want your comment on that. I'm sure this is a very complex debate. We could have it some other time. So please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. Yeah, so I think, films, unless we just look at avant-garde films where usually they're very independently made, then directors aim at having their films screened worldwide, ideally, and so we are talking about a commercial mode of being in the world as well. So of course, a film that uses too many iconoclastic strategies would make the engagement quite difficult for viewers, and therefore it would not qualify as a mainstream film. Potentially. But then again, I do believe that some narrative films can still incorporate in some instances iconoclastic practices or iconoclastic images and so challenge our viewership without making it too disruptive, like in an experimental film.
Yeah, thank you very much. One of the films that your presentation reminded me of was No Man's Land. When I see the screen blacking, I can recall a film on the basis of your presentation on black screen. Can you hear me now? Am I audible, Dr. Chiara?
Yeah, now yes. It comes and goes. Sorry.
Okay. I can recall the film No Man's Land, which ends in black screen and leaves in front of us the millions of questions about everything, about our humanity and our international order. Thank you very much. By the way, if we have any questions from the audience, so we can take them.
Hello. Thank you for the great presentation. I would like to ask what you would like to say about the zone of interest, the film that opens very clearly in a 2 minutes on a 2-minute black screen with Micah Levy's score that the filmmaker refers to as an overture. And then in the middle, there's a flower sequence montage that, in a way, ends with a bleed to red, which he calls it bleed to red. It's just a red screen. And at the end, again, when the commandant is going down the stairs, shall I continue? When the commandant is going down the stairs...
just 1 second, please, one second. Dr. Chiara? One of our audience members is asking a question. Could you hear it? Could you hear the voice from an audience member? She's asking a question.
She can't hear you or me. I don't think she hears anyone. Is it the black?
Dr. Chiara?
Can you speak closer to the black microphone, the other microphone?
Even we can't.
Or I can.
Dr.
I can't hear you because it comes and goes.
All right, now.
The sound.
Now, is it okay? Okay, one of our audience members is coming to the stage. Hello, could you hear us?
Can you hear us? Can you hear me now?
No. Dr. Chiara?
Yes, it's on.
Can you hear me? I can't hear you very well.
Yes, we can hear you. Now, is it okay? Okay, one of our audience members is coming to the stage.
Okay.
Okay. Hello, could you hear us? Voice is going very late.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can.
All right. So
Yes,
one of our audience members wants to ask a question. Okay.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Dr.
you.
Quaranta, do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Okay. The voice is going very late. All right. So one of our audience members wants to ask a question. Okay.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Dr. Quaranta, do you hear me?
I hear not very clearly, but I hear, but not very clearly.
Okay, here is the question about the zone of interest that opens with a 2-minute black screen, which the director calls an overture, with the score by Michael Levy. And then in the middle of the film, there's another montage sequence of flowers, which then bleeds to red. So now we have a screen, a red screen only. And then
Hear the question.
Okay, here is the question
okay.
about the zone of interest that opens with a 2 minutes black screen, which the director calls an overture, with the score by Michael V, and then in which that bleeds to red. So now we have the.
Could you check your message system? Yeah, we are sending you a message.
I could only hear the first half of the question.
Message.
Yes. Well, that film is specifically on the Shoah, and it is, of course, it employs some representational strategies, especially in the relationship, in the disjunctive relationship between the sound that we hear and the images that we see, that are a further elaboration on the politics and the ethics of representing the Shoah. So again, the opening with the black screen that then transform into a bloody red one is not the same as just commenting on black screen, but we are within the context of the strategies about the representation of the Shoah. So of course it is a film that maybe we could define as mainstream to a certain extent, compare especially to experimental films, but it does use an experimental aesthetics in order to find new ways of representing this visual gap, this absence at the core of the Shoah. So what we see and what we hear are completely disjunctive, but they are nonetheless part of the same universe, and sometimes the images represent the absence at the very core of the Shoah. So the black screen there, in my opinion and in my reading, and in this sense, the work of Gerard Weissmann would be quite interesting to use, is a way to provide us with an image, an objectless image, that is the only image possible of the Shoah. I hope I've answered the question.
Thank you very much. Dr. Chiara? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any other question? Thank you very much, Dr. Chiara, and we are really sorry for the interruptions. There was
No
some
worries.
technical problem in the hall, and this unfortunately happened at the end of this presentation, but we really thank you, and it was a really, really very impressive and very rigorous presentation, and I'm sure it's going to lead to lots of thoughts here in this room to different audience here. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I wish I could be there in person with you, but hopefully in the future. But thank you, thank you.
And we will be waiting for you in our future symposia, Cinema Philosophy Symposia, and thank you very much for participating in this session.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.